It was a warm, golden morning in May 2025, in the heart of Ouagadougou, when President Ibrahim Traoré received a call that would set unexpected events in motion. On the line was his trusted international advisor, Dr. Alain Swit. "Mr. President," he said, "we just got a formal invitation from the White House. They're asking you to join a global forum on education alongside Karoline Leavitt, the new U.S. press secretary." Ibrahim looked up from the education progress reports on his desk. He knew exactly who Karoline was: young, fiery, and never shy about making controversial remarks, especially about leaders from outside the West. "What's the format?" Ibrahim asked, already sensing there was more to this. "A live global broadcast," Dr. Ouedraogo explained. "CNN is hosting. The theme is transforming education in the 21st century. They want to compare the US and African systems." Ibrahim gave a small, thoughtful smile. At just 35, he had already reshaped Burkina Faso's education sector in ways the world was beginning to notice. "Let's do it," he said. "Time to show them what Africa has to offer." Cut to Washington, D.C., inside her office at the White House. Karoline Leavitt sat going over briefing notes on Burkina Faso. "This young president thinks he can teach us about education." She laughed, shaking her head. "Let's be real. Just another third-world leader looking for relevance." Her aide, Emily Rodriguez, gently pushed back. "Actually, Karoline, Burkina Faso's numbers are impressive. Literacy and school completion have gone up sharply. Maybe we should take a more respectful tone." Karoline didn't flinch. "Emily, you don't get how this works. These leaders inflate their stats to look capable. My job is to cut through the spin." Back in Ouagadougou, President Ibrahim went into full preparation mode. In the presidential palace, he sat down with Education Minister Aminata combed through the country's progress since he'd taken office. "Verify every number," he said firmly. "Karoline Leavitt is known for discrediting anything that challenges the Western view." Aminata came with proof in hand. Literacy has jumped from 29% to 78% in just 3 years. We've opened 247 new schools. Digital learning is active in 95% of our institutions. And we've launched 23 technical universities. Ibrahim nodded. The numbers were strong, but he knew they weren't enough. "Let's bring real people," he said. "Find students, teachers, and families whose lives have been changed by these reforms." Meanwhile, Indeed.CCRO was on a different mission. "I want dirt," she told her team. "Find anything low literacy, poor infrastructure, that proves this guy doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, this is a country that still struggles with electricity. They can't teach us about education." Her advisor, Michael Thompson, gave a quiet warning. "Karoline, be careful. This president has been recognized by UNESCO and Harvard. If you go in without facts, it could backfire." She brushed him off. "Michael, relax. I've taken down tougher opponents than him." At CNN's newsroom, Anderson Cooper was getting ready. The team wanted this forum to make headlines. "We need something real, something raw," Anderson said. "This isn't just about education, it's about truth, pride, and whose vision will shape the future." The stage was set. Two worldviews, one conversation, and a global audience watching. This wasn't just diplomacy, it was a showdown of ideas. The date was May 22, 2025. The world was watching as CNN's Atlanta studio buzzed with anticipation. Lights were adjusted, mics were tested. Across the globe, President Ibrahim Traoré joined live from Ouagadougou, his connection steady, his focus sharp. In Washington, Karoline Leavitt smoothed out her blazer, certain this would be a quick and easy win. Then came Anderson Cooper's voice, cutting through the quiet. "Good evening, world. Tonight, a conversation that could reshape global education. Joining us, President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso and U.S. Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt." The screen split on one side. Ibrahim seated calmly in his office, the Burkina Faso flag behind him. On the other, Karoline in a polished DC studio. Anderson asked the opening question. "President Traoré, Karoline has said countries like the U.S. should take the lead in global education reform. What's your take?" Ibrahim smiled, steady and respectful. "Mr. Cooper, I have deep respect for America's educational legacy. But innovation doesn't belong to any one nation. Sometimes, the best solutions come from where people least expect them." Karoline jumped in, her tone sharp and sarcastic. "President Traoré, with all due respect, you lead a country where half the population couldn't read just a few years ago. How can you lecture the country that built Harvard and MIT? Ibrahim stayed calm. Ms. Leavitt, exactly because we've faced such challenges, we've had to think differently. When resources are tight, you're forced to be more resourceful, not just more wealthy. Karoline scoffed. Resourceful. Where did you go to school? Did you even attend a real university, or was it all jungle warfare handbooks? The air shifted. Anderson Cooper leaned forward, concerned. Ms. Leavitt, that was uncalled for. Karoline didn't back down. Maybe, but it's honest. Let's not pretend African education matches ours. Ibrahim's face remained calm, his tone firm. Thank you for making it clear what kind of education you stand for. He looked directly into the camera, then calmly spoke. Since my education has become your concern, let me help fill in what your team missed. Suddenly, credentials flashed on screen. Bachelor's in Civil Engineering, Kwame Nkrumah, University of Science and Technology, Ghana, First Class, Master's in Public Administration, the Sorbonne, Paris Full Academic Scholarship, MBA, London School of Economics, completed while serving as a military officer. Karoline's confidence began to crack, but Ibrahim wasn't finished. I speak French, English, Portuguese, Arabic, and 4 African languages. How many languages do you speak, Ms. Leavitt? Karoline stammered. That's not the point. It's about relevance. You're absolutely right, Ibrahim said. So let's talk about that. He leaned in slightly, calm but assertive. You named Harvard, MIT, Stanford, great institutions. But here's something interesting. They're now studying our methods. On-screen official documents appeared confirming it. Harvard Business School had launched a case study based on Burkina Faso's rural education system. MIT was piloting a program inspired by their engineering education reforms. The message was clear. This wasn't just a debate. It was a turning point. Africa wasn't just catching up. Pitt was helping lead the way. Narrator tone. Intense but composed. Like a well-paced documentary, climax. And Ibrahim wasn't done. Our methods aren't just creative, they're effective, he said. Stanford University now wants to study our nationwide rollout of digital education, done with a fraction of the resources you have here. Karoline opened her mouth to speak, but Ibrahim pressed on, his voice calm, unwavering. Do you know why these American institutions are coming to us? Because we took a country where only 29% of people could read and turned it into a leader in science and technology education, all in just 3 years. No American state has achieved that level of transformation. Karoline, flustered and defensive, fired back. These numbers, they're inflated. But Ibrahim didn't even blink. They've been independently verified by UNESCO, by the World Bank, even by your own Department of Education. The studio went quiet. Anderson Cooper leaned forward, clearly intrigued. President Traoré, he asked, can you explain some of the methods that got so much attention from these institutions? Ibrahim smiled. Absolutely. But let me begin with what matters most. We teach our students to respect no matter where it comes from. A lesson, it seems, that some people still struggle to understand. He glanced at Karoline, then turned back to the camera. And since we're talking so much about American academic prestige, Ms. Leavitt, you may be interested to know, I'm currently a visiting professor at 3 U.S. universities. Karoline froze, her face draining of color. That can't be true. Ibrahim remained poised. I teach innovative governance at UC Berkeley, sustainable development at Columbia University, youth leadership at Georgetown. If you'd like to verify, I'd be happy to give you the dean's phone numbers. Even Anderson Cooper looked impressed. That's extraordinary, President Traoré. What's even more extraordinary, Ibrahim continued, is that those lecture halls are always full. American students are eager to learn how we achieved results with a budget 50 times smaller than theirs. Karoline made one final, desperate attempt. But you still lead a poor country. How can you talk about educational success? Ibrahim finally allowed a soft, amused smile. Ms. Leavitt, Burkina Faso may not be rich in dollars, but we're rich in results. Our students consistently outperform their American peers in international math, science, and coding competitions. Screens behind him lit up, showing data and headlines. Last year alone, our students won 47 medals at global academic Olympiads. Our 16-year-old coders are building apps that American companies buy for millions. He continued, his voice now firm with pride. Our university graduation rate is 94%. What's the US rate, Ms. Leavitt? Karoline said nothing. 3%. Ibrahim answered quietly. And yet, we're the ones constantly being asked to prove ourselves. He leaned in one last time. But beyond the numbers, here's what really matters. We teach our young people that intelligence has no color, no nationality, and no economic class. That knowledge is sacred. That growth begins with respect. The room fell completely silent. No one dared interrupt. Karoline sat frozen, visibly shaken, her early confidence shattered. She tried to recover, weakly. I wasn't trying to insult African intelligence. I was just... What exactly? Ms. Leavitt, Ibrahim asked, gently but firmly. Questioning my competence based on your assumptions about African education. Assuming that anything American must automatically be better. Anderson Cooper watched closely. Karoline had no answer. For the first time in the evening, it was clear to everyone this wasn't just an argument. Ibrahim had one. It was a moment that redefined how the world looked at Africa. Narrator tone, reflective, dignified, and compelling. Anderson Cooper turned back to the camera. President Traoré, you've clearly come well prepared for this forum. Ibrahim offered a gentle smile. No special preparation was needed, he said. This is simply the reality of our daily work. Miss Leavitt, unfortunately, came with assumptions, rather than understanding. Karoline shifted in her seat, trying to pivot. Well, let's talk realistically about resources, she said. The United States invests billions into education every year, but Ibrahim cut in, calm and measured. And yet your students consistently fall behind countries with far fewer resources. Maybe the problem isn't how much you spend, but how you spend it. On the screen, international education rankings appeared. America's numbers were slipping, especially in science and math. Meanwhile, Burkina Faso had climbed 47 places in just 3 years. Karoline looked frustrated. You're twisting the data. I'm quoting your own Department of Education, Ibrahim replied, still calm. And if you believe that's a distortion, perhaps it's time to question your own data collection. He went on, still composed. Our teachers earn fair wages for our cost of living. They focus on teaching, not juggling multiple jobs just to survive. Maybe that's a revolutionary idea. Then Anderson turned to Karoline, catching her off guard. Miss Leavitt, how do you respond to these points on educational efficiency? There was a long pause. Karoline seemed stuck. We'd need to analyze that data more thoroughly, she mumbled. Of course. Ibrahim nodded. It's always wise to study carefully before making bold public claims. Karoline's silence echoed louder than any of her earlier arguments. The mood in the studio had completely shifted. Anderson moved things along. President Traoré, what advice would you give to countries struggling with limited educational resources? Ibrahim glanced briefly toward Karoline, then answered sincerely. My first advice. Never underestimate how powerful innovation becomes when resources are limited. Scarcity pushes people to be creative in ways abundance never will. He continued, with quiet pride. When we had no computers, our teachers taught using mobile phones. When we couldn't afford science labs, they built them with recycled materials. Today, those same methods are being studied by some of the world's richest universities. Karoline tried to re-enter the conversation. Well, surely we can agree that more resources improve education quality. Absolutely, Ibrahim replied. But resources without vision are wasted. Vision without resources forces innovation. Ideally, you have both. But if I must choose, I'll take vision. He turned his gaze directly to her. Your first question about where I studied speaks volumes. It shows how often we confuse prestige with competence. Real results should matter more than famous names. Anderson leaned forward again. Can you expand on that? Gladly, Ibrahim said. Harvard is great because it delivers results, not because it has a famous name. But if a small rural school in Burkina Faso produces better engineers than Harvard, shouldn't it earn equal respect? He paused. The point landed. Prestige should follow performance, not come before it. Karoline attempted a final defense. But tradition and reputation do matter in education. They do, Ibrahim agreed. In maintaining the status quo. But real innovation starts by questioning tradition, not worshipping it. He spoke with clarity and conviction now. Our students are taught to question everything, including us. They don't just memorize facts. They challenge systems. They suggest ideas that surprise us. And they achieve results no one expects. And with that, Ibrahim Traoré leaned back, having said all that needed to be said. Narrator voice lowers. To a thoughtful close. This wasn't just a televised debate. It was a quiet revolution broadcast live to the world. A reminder that true education doesn't just come from power, money, or legacy. It comes from truth, resilience, and visions. And vision. Narrator tone. Reflective, powerful, and quietly emotional. The contrast could no longer be ignored. Ibrahim's calm wisdom stood in stark contrast to Karoline's collapsing confidence, and millions of viewers felt it. Then, with the same grace he had shown all evening, President Ibrahim Traoré leaned forward to deliver one final devastating truth. Ms. Leavitt, he said gently, there's something I'd like to share. It might explain today's conversation a little better. Karoline's eyes flickered nervous. She sensed what was coming. Just last month, I was invited to speak at a major conference in the United States. A gathering of presidents and education leaders focused on innovation in resource-limited settings. Anderson Cooper, now fully engaged, asked, who organized it? Mr. President. Ibrahim didn't hesitate. The United States Department of Education. He paused, letting it sink in. Apparently, they place more value on our experience than their own press secretary. Karoline sat frozen. Her silence said more than words ever could. That can't be true. She finally muttered. I'd be happy to forward you the confirmation email from Secretary Miguel Cardona. Ibrahim replied. He specifically highlighted our literacy, model and rural STEM success as areas of interest. And then he added something even more striking. In fact, 3 American universities have officially requested to send teams to study our work, including one you mentioned earlier. Behind him, letters appeared on the screen, signed and sealed. MIT, requesting access to study how Burkina Faso teaches engineering using basic low-cost tools. Harvard, interested in youth leadership programs and civic engagement strategies. Stanford, eager to model their digital learning programs after Burkina Faso's inclusive system. Karoline scrambled. But that doesn't mean you're superior. I never claimed we were, Ibrahim replied gently. I said we're different. We've faced different obstacles. And those obstacles have led us to discover solutions worth sharing. He leaned in once more, his voice low and sincere. Real educational strength comes from mutual learning. The US has a lot to offer. But so do we. Arrogance on either side only holds us back. Anderson Cooper shook his head in quiet awe. President Traoré, that is a remarkably mature perspective. It's not just mature, Ibrahim replied. It's necessary. In today's world, we can't afford to ignore knowledge no matter where it comes from. Karoline Leavitt sat silent. The weight of everything she'd said and heard had finally settled. And just as Anderson was preparing to wrap up the forum, she surprised everyone. President Traoré, she said, her voice softer now. I owe you an apology. Ibrahim blinked, genuinely surprised for the first time that evening. It's not necessary. Ms. Leavitt, he said kindly. Yes, it is, she insisted, struggling to hold back her emotion. I came into this with a closed mind. I assumed American education was automatically superior. I never even considered that I might be wrong. Anderson Cooper leaned back, visibly struck by the moment. What changed your mind, Ms. Leavitt? Karoline took a breath. Every fact, President Traoré presented tonight challenged everything I assumed. The results, the proof, it was undeniable. I can't argue with it. And I can't pretend my ignorance was justified. Ibrahim leaned forward, this time with something softer in his tone. Ms. Leavitt, it takes courage to admit you were wrong. And that is something to respect. Karoline gave a bitter laugh. Well, I've just publicly embarrassed myself. I represent the United States government, and I've demonstrated a complete lack of awareness about some of the most impactful innovations in education today. Ibrahim smiled gently. But now you know, and that's what learning is. It's a process. None of us starts out knowing everything. Karoline nodded slowly, humbled in front of the world. Narrator tone, soft and steady as closing music begins in a conversation that began with tension and assumptions. Something unexpected happened. Truth broke through. It wasn't just a debate. It became a lesson for everyone watching. That knowledge doesn't wear a flag. That learning is not about who's louder, but who's willing to listen. And that real education is never one-sided. Narrator tone, hopeful, full circle. Reflective. Then came a moment no one expected. President Traoré, Karoline Leavitt said, her voice steady now. On behalf of the U.S. government, I'd like to make a formal request. She took a breath. I invite you to present Burkina Faso's education methods to our state secretaries of education. Anderson Cooper looked visibly moved. That's remarkable. Ms. Leavitt, it's necessary, she replied. If American universities want to study these models, then so should our policymakers. For the first time all evening, Ibrahim smiled not politely, but genuinely. It would be an honor, he said. Education moves forward when we share knowledge, not when we guard it. But Karoline wasn't finished. There's more, she said. I'd like to propose a full exchange program between American educators and those in Burkina Faso. Real two-way learning. Ibrahim nodded, clearly touched. Now you're speaking like a true educator. Narrator tone. Building to global. Change 6 months later. The shockwaves of that evening were still rippling across the world. Karoline Leavitt stood in Ouagadougou, now leading the third American delegation of educators. She spoke to CNN with quiet reflection. I never imagined I'd come here to learn about education, she said. But this country has lessons the world needs to hear. The exchange program she proposed had become a global model. 20 countries had signed on to replicate it. In Ibrahim's office, Dr. Ouedraogo shared the news. Burkina Faso is now seen as a benchmark for educational innovation. Aminata Compere entered moments later, holding the latest reports. Sir, we've received 847 formal requests from international universities to study our model. Our influence has grown 500% since the forum. Ibrahim read the figures and looked up calmly. The most important thing, he said, is that we're proving education works best when it's shared. America is improving its rural systems. Using our methods, we're expanding our research thanks to their technology. And the woman who once dismissed African education, she had become one of its fiercest champions. Speaking at Harvard, Karoline admitted openly, my ignorance was embarrassing. But it taught me something. Arrogance is the greatest obstacle to learning. Narrator tone. Expanding beyond education. Impact didn't stop at classrooms. Across sectors from healthcare to policy, American leaders began rethinking long-held assumptions about African innovation. A political analyst put it simply, Ibrahim Traoré didn't just defend his country, he opened a door for mutual respect. Narrator tone. Personal and soft. Like a final chapter one quiet evening. Ibrahim walked through the palace gardens with his advisor Ajara. You've changed the way the world sees African education, she said. But Ibrahim gently corrected her. I didn't change anything. I just showed a reality that was always there. A reality people like you were finally willing to see. Ajara smiled. And Karoline? She proved something far more powerful. Ibrahim replied. That intelligent, people can admit their mistakes and grow. That's more valuable than never making mistakes at all. Narrator tone. Poetic and closing 1 year later. Karoline Leavitt published a book, Lessons from Burkina Faso, How Humility Transformed My Vision of Education. It became an international bestseller. In the dedication, she wrote, President Ibrahim Traoré taught me that real education begins with admitting what we don't yet know. His response didn't just defend his nation. It educated the world.